The Skull Goblet Prince. In 1108, a Crusader prince met a fate that would horrify even the battle-hardened warriors of his time. As the ruler of Galilee, Gervase of Bezoches commanded vast estates and formidable military power in the newly established Crusader kingdom. His wealth was evident in his ornate armor and the size of his personal guard. On a spring morning, Gervase led a raiding party against Bedouin encampments near Damascus. Intelligence reports had been wrong. The Turks were waiting, his forces were quickly surrounded, and the prince himself was dragged from his horse as his men were slaughtered around him. The victorious Turkish commander, Tughtekin, recognized the value of his captive immediately. Gervase was no common soldier, but a high-ranking Frankish noble. He ordered the prince bound and transported to Damascus, where a public execution would demonstrate Turkish power. For 3 days, Gervase remained in a dark cell beneath the city. On the 4th morning, he was dragged into the blazing sun before a gathered crowd. Witnesses recorded that he refused a blindfold when offered. Soldiers tied him to a wooden post in the center of the square. Tughtekin ordered his archers to make the death slow. The first arrow struck Gervase's limbs rather than vital organs. Each impact brought fresh agony, but not the release of death. The prince remained conscious as arrow after arrow penetrated his body. Blood pooled at his feet as more arrows found their mark. Only after 27 wounds did Gervase finally lose consciousness. Even then, his heart continued beating for several more minutes as the final arrow struck. After death was confirmed, Tughtekin ordered the prince's head removed. Court physicians carefully cut away the scalp and flesh. The skull was meticulously cleaned, polished, and rimmed with silver. For years afterward, Tughtekin used this macabre goblet during state banquets, drinking wine from the cranium of the once powerful prince, a reminder to his enemies of the price of defiance. The silver-rimmed skull became one of Damascus's most notorious treasures, a noble's remains transformed into a vessel for his conqueror's pleasure. The Prince in the Chest. In the summer of 1762, a Korean royal met a fate so cruel that court officials were forbidden from recording the details. As heir to the Joseon dynasty, Crown Prince Sado lived in unimaginable luxury. His robes were woven with gold thread, and servants attended to his every need in palatial quarters filled with the priceless treasures. Behind the ornate screens and silk curtains, a darker reality emerged. By his 20s, Sado had developed severe mental instability. He flew into uncontrollable rages, beating servants to death for minor infractions. His paranoia grew until he believed his clothing was trying to poison him, causing him to burn hundreds of expensive garments. On July 4th, 1762, after Sado murdered a eunuch in front of witnesses, King Yongjo made his decision. The throne could not pass to a madman, but royal blood could not be directly spilled. A rice chest was brought to the courtyard of Changgyeongung Palace. Standing 7 feet long and 3 feet wide, it was typically used for storing grain. Court records show that Sado was ordered to enter the chest himself. As he climbed inside, the heavy wooden lid was closed over him. Iron locks sealed it shut, while the prince remained conscious inside. The temperature that day reached 97 degrees Fahrenheit. For the first hours, witnesses reported hearing Sado screaming and pounding against the chest walls. His cries echoed through the palace courtyards. Guards were posted to ensure no one attempted to release him. The king himself retreated to his chambers and ordered musicians to play loudly to drown out his son's voice. By the second day, the screams had weakened to moans. The summer heat intensified the conditions inside the box. Without water, Sado quickly became dehydrated. Without air circulation, each breath became more difficult than the last. His body temperature rose dangerously high as he lay in his own waste. Court physicians later estimated that Sado remained conscious for nearly 5 days before slipping into delirium. On the 8th day, July 12th, the sounds from within the chest finally stopped. When officials opened it, they found the prince's body contorted in his final struggle for air, his fingernails broken from scratching at the wooden walls. The rice chest, now stained with royal blood, was immediately burned. Heretic Duchess burnt alive. On September 26, 1568, the Spanish Inquisition demonstrated that noble blood offered no protection against the flames of heresy. Born into minor nobility, Leonor de Cisneros married Antonio Herezuelo, a prominent lawyer whose connections elevated her status in Valladolid society. Their mansion contained tapestries depicting Catholic saints, but their private library held forbidden texts. By 1558, Leonor and Antonio had joined a clandestine Protestant group. They met in cellars and private homes, reading translated works of Luther and Calvin. These gatherings included academics, clergy, and aristocrats. The intellectual elite of Valladolid united in their rejection of Catholic doctrine. On May 21, 1558, inquisitors raided one of their meetings. Betrayed by a fellow member, the entire congregation was arrested. Leonor and Antonio were separated immediately. They were taken to the secret prisons of the Inquisition, where stone cells measured barely 6 feet across. During interrogation, Leonor initially recanted her Protestant beliefs. The Inquisition's methods were persuasive. Prisoners were shown instruments of torture while questioned. She was sentenced to life imprisonment but spared execution. Her husband, however, refused to recant and was burned alive in 1559. During her imprisonment, something changed in Leonor. Guards reported her refusing Catholic sacraments and openly criticizing church practices. By 1568, she was formally charged as a relapsed heretic, one who returns to heresy after recanting. This offense carried only one sentence. On the morning of her execution, Leonor was dressed in the yellow San Benito garment marked with flames and devils. A procession led her through the streets to the Plaza Mayor where a wooden platform had been constructed. Bundles of wood surrounded a central post. Witnesses recorded her calm demeanor as officials read the charges. When offered a final chance to recant, Leonor instead proclaimed her Protestant faith loudly enough for the crowd of thousands to hear. The inquisitors ordered her tongue clamped to prevent further blasphemy. Executioners bound her to the stake with an iron chain. Unlike some condemned heretics, Leonor was offered no mercy of strangulation before the flames. When the wood was lit, the fire spread quickly. Witnesses described her maintaining eye contact with the inquisitors as the flames reached her body. The fire consumed her clothing first, then began to blacken her skin. She remained conscious and standing for several minutes as the flames rose higher. Her hair ignited like a torch. Only when the fire reached her vital organs did Leonor finally collapse into the inferno that had been prepared for her heresy. The doomed Roman heiress. On September 11, 1599, the citizens of Rome gathered to witness the execution of a young noblewoman whose crime was seeking escape from unspeakable abuse. Beatrice Cenci was born into one of Rome's oldest families, her inheritance worth fortunes. She lived in a palazzo filled with Renaissance masterpieces and wore gowns of imported silk. Behind the palace walls, her father Francesco Cenci subjected her to years of physical and sexual violence. A man known for his cruelty, Francesco had already been imprisoned once for his crimes, but had purchased freedom with his vast wealth. When he moved his family to the isolated castle of La Petrella, Beatrice realized no help would come. In desperation, she conspired with her stepmother Lucrezia and brother Giacomo. They hired 2 servants to murder Francesco in his sleep. The assassins struck the count with a hammer and threw his body from a balcony to disguise the death as an accident. For a brief moment, the family believed themselves free, but suspicions arose. Under Pope Clement VIII's orders, investigators discovered inconsistencies in their story. When questioned separately, their accounts differed. The servants confessed under torture, and the Cenci family was arrested immediately. Beatrice endured the cord torture, her arms tied behind her back and her body repeatedly hoisted by ropes and dropped, dislocating her shoulders. Still, she maintained her innocence until shown the confessions. Only then did she admit her role in the killing. On the morning of her execution, Beatrice wore a white dress symbolizing purity. She was led to a scaffold erected on San Angelo Bridge. Witnesses described her calm demeanor as she walked the stone steps. She gave away her possessions to servants and forgave her enemies. The executioner positioned her kneeling at the block. A single blow of the sword was meant to end her life, but it failed to completely sever her neck. Beatrice remained conscious as blood sprayed across the platform. A second stroke was needed. The crowd fell silent as her head finally separated from her body. Pope Clement confiscated the entire Cenci fortune minutes after her death. The Iron Throne Martyr. In the summer of 1514, Hungarian nobles devised an execution so theatrical and cruel that it would serve as warning for centuries. György Doja began as a skilled cavalry officer, rising to minor nobility through military service. When Pope Leo X called for a crusade against the Ottoman Empire, Doja was appointed to lead an army of peasants. As the crusade preparations stalled, Doja's hungry troops turned against the Hungarian nobility instead. What began as a military campaign transformed into Europe's largest peasant rebellion, with Doja controlling significant portions of the kingdom. His army of 100,000 threatened the established order. In July, the rebellion was crushed at Temesvar. Doja was captured alive. The nobles, led by János Zápolya, decided ordinary execution was insufficient. A demonstration was required to prevent future uprisings. On July 20th, Doja was taken to a courtyard where his captured followers had been starved for 2 weeks. They watched as smiths heated metal in glowing forges. The nobles informed Doja that he would be crowned as the peasant king he aspired to be. Soldiers stripped him naked and forced him onto an iron throne heated until it glowed red. The metal seared his flesh instantly, filling the air with the smell of burning skin. As Doja screamed, they placed a heated metal crown upon his head. The iron adhered to his skull as it burned through to the bone. A red-hot scepter was thrust into his hand, the metal fusing to his palm. Throughout this torture, Doja remained conscious. Witnesses reported that he refused to scream after the initial shock, instead staring defiantly at his tormentors. The final act of the execution was the most barbaric. The starving peasant captives were brought forward and ordered to bite chunks of flesh from their leader's body. Those who hesitated were killed on the spot. Those who complied were promised freedom. Doja endured nearly an hour of this torture before blood loss and shock finally ended his suffering. His last words, according to chronicles, were not pleas for mercy but a curse upon the Hungarian nobility. The Chancellor's Reckoning. In 1477, one of Burgundy's most powerful political figures discovered how quickly wealth and status could evaporate. As Chancellor of Burgundy, William Huguenot controlled the finances of Europe's richest court. His position granted him magnificent estates and influence second only to Duke Charles the Bold himself. On January 5th, Charles was killed at the Battle of Nancy, leaving his 19-year-old daughter Mary as his heir. The political landscape shifted instantly. Without Charles' protection, Huguenot found himself surrounded by enemies who had long resented his power and foreign birth. The cities of Flanders, particularly Ghent, saw their opportunity. When Mary arrived in Ghent on February 3rd, she was effectively held captive by the city's burghers. They demanded she dismiss her father's advisors and restore ancient privileges Charles had revoked. Mary initially refused, continuing to rely on Huguenot's counsel. On February 28th, the leaders of Ghent discovered letters showing Huguenot had been conducting secret negotiations with the French king. They accused him of betraying both Burgundy and their new duchess. Huguenot was arrested in his chambers that night. Guards dragged him from his silk bedsheets to a damp cell beneath the Gravenstein castle. His rings and fine clothing were stripped away. For the first time, the Chancellor realized the gravity of his situation. A hasty trial was convened the next morning. Huguenot defended himself eloquently, citing his years of loyal service, but the verdict had been decided before he spoke a word. The tribunal sentenced him to immediate execution. Duchess Mary pleaded for her advisor's life, even falling to her knees before the town magistrates. Her tears had no effect. On April 3rd, Huguenot was led to the Friday Market Square where a scaffold waited. The once powerful chancellor climbed the steps with dignity. As he knelt before the block, he could see his own reflection in the executioner's blade, a final glimpse of the man who had risen so high only to fall so completely. The sword swung down, separating his head from his body in a single stroke. His blood spilled across the platform while the citizens of Ghent cheered the death of the foreign chancellor who had grown too wealthy at their expense. The guillotined duchess. On July 22, 1794, the blade of the guillotine claimed a woman whose family had enjoyed wealth and privilege for over 5 centuries. The Duchesse de Noailles was descended from Crusader knights and royal favorites. Her Paris mansion contained priceless tapestries, and her jewelry collection alone would have funded a small army. The revolution changed everything. When the Bastille fell in 1789, Catherine de Cossé initially believed the aristocracy could weather the storm. She continued hosting lavish dinners while peasants starved in the streets outside. Her husband, the Duke, urged her to flee to Austria. She refused, believing her bloodline would protect her. In October 1793, Robespierre's reign of terror intensified. The Committee of Public Safety ordered the arrest of all enemies of the Republic. Catherine's name appeared on the first list. Republican guards arrived at her mansion, finding her at her dressing table surrounded by silver brushes and perfume bottles. She was taken to La Conciergerie prison along with her daughter and elderly mother-in-law. Their cells were damp stone rooms that had once housed servants. For 8 months, they lived on black bread and water, sleeping on straw pallets that crawled with vermin. On July 21st, Catherine and her family were tried before the Revolutionary Tribunal. The hearing lasted 17 minutes. No defense was permitted. The judge pronounced them guilty of conspiring against the Republic and the liberty of the people. At 4:00 p.m. the following day, guards led Catherine from her cell. She was 70 years old. Her once elegant hands were bound behind her back, and her gray hair was roughly cut to expose her neck. She was loaded onto a cart with 18 other condemned aristocrats for the journey to the Place de la Révolution. The crowds lining the streets spat and threw rotting vegetables as the cart passed. Catherine sat straight-backed, her face expressionless. At the scaffold, she watched as her daughter was executed first, then her mother-in-law. When her turn came, she climbed the steps without assistance. The executioner positioned her beneath the waiting blade. In her final moments, witnesses reported that she stared directly at the jeering crowd without flinching. The blade fell with mechanical precision. Her head dropped into the waiting basket as blood spurted from her severed neck. The assassin's justice. In 1171, Burma's wealthiest and most feared ruler learned that palace walls cannot keep karmic justice at bay. Known as the Evil King, Narathu ascended to the throne of Pagan after murdering his father, Alangsithu, and his elder brother, Min Shinsaw. His palace contained treasures from across Asia. jade statues, gold-plated Buddhas, and gemstones the size of bird eggs. Narathu's reign was marked by unprecedented cruelty. He executed officials for minor infractions, often watching their slow deaths while eating elaborate meals. His paranoia grew alongside his body count. The king trusted no one, requiring even his wives to undergo multiple searches before entering his presence. Despite his crimes, Narathu maintained a public facade of Buddhist piety. He ordered the construction of the massive Damayangi temple, the largest in Pagan. Workers who failed to meet his exacting standards had their arms chopped off. The mortar of the temple was rumored to contain human blood. On a hot afternoon in 1171, a group of 8 men arrived at the palace gates. They wore the saffron robes of Buddhist monks and carried only small bundles. The king's guards inspected them but found nothing suspicious. Narathu, eager to display his religious devotion, ordered the monks brought to his private chamber. The king sat on his jewel-encrusted throne as the monks entered and prostrated themselves. As they rose, the lead monk approached to offer a blessing. When he was within arm's reach, he suddenly pulled a dagger concealed in his robes. Before the guards could react, the blade plunged into Narathu's chest. The other monks revealed similar weapons and attacked the surprised guards. The king tried to flee but collapsed after taking just 3 steps. The assassin struck again and again, inflicting 22 separate wounds. Narathu remained conscious through much of the attack, feeling the life drain from his body on the same marble floor where he had ordered so many deaths. As he lay dying, the lead assassin revealed the truth. They were not monks, but agents of the king of Patakaya, whose daughter, one of Narathu's queens, had been executed for minor criticism. The last thing Narathu saw was his killer removing the saffron robe to reveal the royal insignia of Patakaya.